this, let's get on to the AFC North. Browns, Bengals, Steelers, Ravens. Geoff, what do you got?
So this is definitely an interesting division to watch because obviously the Ravens are the favorites to win. But if you look at the team like the Steelers, for example, they were 8-8 last year, and that was with not good quarterbacks. They were trash. There were players like Delvin Hodges or Mason Rudolph who had horrible seasons. And if you also look at the Browns, they were also really bad, but now they've fixed all their problems. They have a much better O-line. They have a much better coach in Kevin Stefanski. And they had Austin Hooper, who might be another great weapon for them. But I still think the favorites to win this division are the Ravens, just because of all this down on this roster and all the good players they have. I don't see any weaknesses with them. And they also added Patrick Queen, J.K. Dobbins, Calais Campbell, who are, again, going to make this defense and offense even better. So I see the Ravens winning this division without a doubt.
Sam?
Overall, I think this just depends on how well Big Ben can do finally back. If Big Ben is able to light a fire back underneath the Steelers team, it'll be the same business as usual once again, with all of these teams knocking each other out of the playoffs, as they seem to do every year. With, I believe the Steelers last year were praying that the Browns somehow beat one of their own so that they can slip into the playoffs, which always seems to happen. It always seems to be a lot of prayers going on just to make sure that one of these teams, other than the front runner, gets in. I think this is Big Ben's one of his final chances at getting this team through. But I think Baltimore still has a better time overall, with the last 5 games in particular being easier, which is a huge advantage other than the Bills game. But, yeah, they have the Cowboys and some other teams that are indecisive so far. And pretty much just matters on if the Ravens beat the Steelers. If the Ravens beat the Steelers, they're out, obviously, and the Ravens will move on. But if the Steelers can somehow steal some wins, they'll end up having to play again in the playoffs, and that'll be the last decisive match again. And I still think the Ravens are going to end up on top.
Kevin?
I disagree with both Geoffrey and Sam, respectfully. I think that the Steelers are the division favorites here. And I understand that the Ravens are probably the most complete roster in the division and probably more talented roster. But the Steelers, let's look at them this past season. They went 8-8, and they started off 1-4. They started off 1-4. They had a 7-1 run. They lost to the Seahawks, good teams like the Seahawks, by 2 points. They lost to the Ravens in overtime by 3 points with quarterbacks like Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, right? They lost to good teams by 1 possession games. They lost to the Bills by 1 touchdown. And then they actually stole Chris Wormley from the Ravens. They added Eric Ebron from the Colts, right? They added Chase Claypool in the draft. And Big Ben's coming back. And it's not like the Steelers have weaknesses, right? Because their offensive line and their defensive line are both top 10 rated by PFF in the NFL. Ravens do have a better offensive line. Ravens also do have a better defensive line. But they both are in the top 10, so it's not really a substantial difference. And the Steelers also had a top 3 pass protection offensive line, which will benefit Ben Roethlisberger more than it will benefit Lamar Jackson, because Roethlisberger is more of a pure passer than Lamar Jackson is. And this is all with terrible statistics. Let's look at last year. Steelers were ravaged by injuries, and they still went 500. Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner, they were injured for a lot of the season. The top rusher in the Steelers last year had 460 yards. 460 yards was a top rusher. They still went 8-8 with 2 quarterbacks with a quarterback rating under 90. Subpar. That just shows how good of a coach Mike Tomlin is. But when have you ever heard of a team that goes 8-8 and has their coach be a coach of the year candidate, right? You don't hear about that. I just think the Steelers are so, they're very disciplined. Big Ben brings another level back. I think it'll be competitive between the Ravens and Steelers, but overall, I think this is the Steelers division.
Yes, I agree with you there. I think there's minuscule differences between the defenses in Pittsburgh and Baltimore. And I think both John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin are great coaches that you come by once in a generation. And then I think the league might adapt to what we saw from Lamar Jackson a little bit last season, like all of his running and all of that running game in Baltimore. I think the league will adapt to it, and they'll still be a competitive team. Don't get me wrong, but they'll have a little bit of a step back because last season was obviously a very high season with regards to their stats that they put up.
It's pretty much exactly what I said earlier. This will all be determined by who wins one-on-one Ravens-Steelers, as it often does with this conference. It'll just be a fight to see who can stay alive and not knock each other out of contention early.
And I also have a question on the Ravens offensive line. They lost Marshall Yanda, who's probably one of the top elite offensive linemen in this league. The Steelers also lost Ramon Foster to retirement, but they replaced him with Steven Wisniewski. Who did the Ravens replace Marshall Yanda with? I understand that both teams are very solid, and I looked forward to, the era where Steelers and Ravens were always those gritty games where the division was decided by those last games, and I'm excited for that. But like Serge said, Ravens went 14-2 last year. They're definitely going to take a step back.
All right, but Lamar Jackson is a dual threat quarterback, so I don't think Marshall Yanda being gone is going to affect him too much because he's still going to run around and he's still going to juke people. And I don't see him getting sacked too much, even without a great offensive line.
But they're still a run-heavy team, so they still utilize – they got Dobbins in the draft and Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram was a 1,000-yard rusher. That production is definitely going to be impacted in a certain way if one of your top offensive linemen retires.
I would disagree with that point.
We'll just have to wait until the preseason.
All right. Well, do we have any words to mention on the Browns and Bengals, or are they're kind of irrelevant at this point?
The freaking Bengals are screwed. I think the NFL is out to destroy these new quarterbacks because they have not only him but Tua as well, if he does start for the Dolphins, through the ringers with the worst. They have to deal with the best defenses in the NFL. Right off the bat, right when they're starting, if they both do start, which is sad, but I think they're both screwed, at least with the Bengals case.
So I've got to partially disagree. So I'm really looking forward to what Joe Burrow can do with that Bengals team. And on that Tua point, I don't think Tua is going to start right away. I think they're going to transition him into the game off of Ryan Fitzpatrick. But I'm really interested at the Browns, Geoffrey's Super Bowl pick from last year. They got Kevin Stefanski, Vikings offensive coordinator, and you know who they signed? Case Keenum. And I know that's not like a sexy pickup, but Case Keenum's big year was under Kevin Stefanski, and that was the year when the meaningless Indianapolis Miracle happened. And they also got, Sendejo from the Vikings. So Stefanski is getting all these Vikings connections back. And Geoffrey mentioned earlier they got Austin Hooper. And Odell Beckham's coming back motivated as ever. Jarvis Landry's still there. Nick Chubb is really underrated. Kareem Hunt. It has so many weapons now. And Baker Mayfield just needs to take that step up. He needs to stop focusing on commercials. He needs to focus on his game. If Baker Mayfield actually hones his skills, this Browns team is a huge, huge dark horse in the AFC. But still, it's between the Ravens and Steelers.